There are themes that come charging up at me out of our prayer. And as I was thinking about tonight, I wanted to share with you a favorite passage of mine, maybe you too, from the 8th chapter of Romans. And I love the way that the paraphrase of the Bible puts it, that paraphrase titled The Message. Sometimes it's really worth looking at. In the 8th chapter of Romans, Paul writes this: "Meanwhile, the moment we get tired in the waiting, God's Spirit is right alongside, helping us along. If we don't know how or what to pray, it doesn't matter. The Spirit does our praying in and for us, making prayer out of our wordless sighs, our aching groans. The Spirit knows us far better than we know ourselves and keeps us present before God." I love this notion that at the end of the day, ultimately, all our prayers are a manifestation of the Holy Spirit praying within us with sighs too deep for words, as the more familiar translation puts it. And I was reminded in looking at that passage of a sermon I heard way back in the year 2000 at the General Convention in Denver that year, which was a time of some heightened anxiety, both around the sexuality debates, but also that was the year that we ratified, that we adopted, called the Common Mission with the Lutherans. It's become part of the landscape, but it was a time of real heightened anxiety. A friend of mine, a priest in the Diocese of Chicago, who served as chaplain to the House of Bishops during most of Frank Griswold's time as presiding bishop, a guy named Mark McIntosh, who just died a couple of years ago, way too young, in his 50s. ALS, terrible, ravaging disease, but Mark was a person of incredible wisdom and spiritual oomph. He was, at the time of his death, the chair of the Department of Christian Spirituality at Loyola. The Jesuits created that position for him, which was pretty delicious, that an Episcopalian was the head of that department at Loyola. One of the things Mark said, among others, in that sermon I've never forgotten, in this to this joint session, it was a huge liturgy, lots of people gathered there. Mark said this to the gathered assembly: "Anxiety," he said, "is a sure sign that we don't want enough." Anxiety is a sure sign, a symptom, he said, that our desires are too small. We settle for things that we need not settle for. We think too small. And it caused me to wonder, as my anxiety spikes occasionally around the tasks we're engaged in, maybe yours too. We get word of something popping up here, popping up there around this or that issue. The question that comes to me is, do we want enough? Are those symptomatic pop-ups of anxiousness a sign that our desires are not big enough? The question a spiritual director asked me once, he said, "The only question that matters in the spiritual life is this: what do you want?" Jesus is constantly asking people, what do you want? So in this work, I ask myself and suggest that maybe you ask yourself, ourselves, what we might ask ourselves: what do we really want? What is it that we long for? At the end of the day, in all of this trialogue work, what do we long for? What do we ache for? As one preacher put it. The sanctification of our desires. I'm suggesting that we might want to interrogate our own wants for this process, for our church, ultimately for the share in God's mission that's been given into our hands as the Episcopal Church in Wisconsin. What do we want? The question might be put this way: what is it, if we're to believe Romans, what is it that the Spirit is bringing about in us? how is the Holy Spirit praying within us, plumbing the depths of our desires?